Bonjour à tous, je me présente, je suis Monique Barbut.
Good evening. Let me introduce myself. My name is Monique Barbut. I'm the Minister for Ecological Transition in France. And I am delighted to moderate this panel for the closing event of the day. We will be starting with a panel with both presidents that count a lot for us. The COP21 president, Laurent Fabius, and Mr. André Corrêa de Lago, who will have a heavy task, who will be the president of COP30. Of course, 10 years after the Paris Agreement, we wanted to have this event here, and you are both evidence that multilateralism exists and that it is bringing hope. We had events on methane, on coal, and on nature-based solutions with mitigation, respect for nature. I would like to first talk to Mr. Fabius and ask this question. How, as a former president of COP21 and with the wisdom you have a posteriori, how will you conduct discussion, how would you conduct discussion to phasing out coal, mitigating new gases like methane and other topics that are more in between economic development, protection of biodiversity, and climate. So what would you advise, given your experience in these negotiations? Thank you very much. Good evening. I am delighted to be here with you, and especially with my friend André, who will have the heavy duty to be president of COP30 in Belém. Maybe you don't know it, but one of the great initiatives that was taken by the Brazilian presidents was to create this circle of COP presidents. You gathered under your aegis the entirety of all presidents of the COPs since COP21 in Paris. This was an excellent idea, except that you asked me to be the president of this circle of presidents. That maybe was not such a great idea. I don't want to give any piece of advice. André knows perfectly the topics at hand. He followed through and very closely all the COPs. And his president has a concept of what Belém COPs needs to be with a wider vision, and I support this vision entirely, that we need to be in continuity with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is about the climate, but it is a symbol for multilateralism, for development, and for peace. Now, before I answer this question, one of the main things that I can say is this: multilateralism is at the core of this. No one needs to be under any kind of illusion. The Paris Agreement is under attack. It is under attack. Sometimes it is an offhand attack. Sometimes it is an attack right in the face. Sometimes it is by quitting it that it is under attack. And some even ask others to leave the Paris Agreement. So it's not like everyone believes that the Paris Agreement is a great thing. It is under attack because it gives us keys, it gives us goals, it gives us processes, and because it is a symbol for multilateralism, for research, for development, for peace, and preservation of law. That's what's at stake beyond the climate idea. Now, you've mentioned a couple of issues, and I would like to come back on one of them, methane. The causes of greenhouse gas emissions are many, and the first one is always CO2. It's the first one that comes to mind when you think about greenhouse gas emissions. These greenhouse gas emissions are extremely negative, and we need to eliminate them. But we always forget methane. For some complex reason, it is rarely part of any analysis or conversation. CO2 is carbon dioxide, CH4 is methane. Not many people have heard of CH4. I would like to say something more precise about methane now. What is the responsibility over the last few years of methane compared to CO2 in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Methane equals 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. It is a lot. And methane has two things about it. It has a calorie power much higher, much stronger than CO2, and it stays in the atmosphere much longer as well. Methane has three main sources, one of them being flaring, the second one is waste, and the third
verrez concrètement ce à quoi je fais allusion, les émissions de gaz par le bétail.
Is cows that you probably know about, which is another issue. I hope it will be resolved thanks to technological progress, but it poses great problems in countries such as India, for example. For the first two cases, 30% of methane, 30% of greenhouse gas emissions are concentrated in the oil and gas industry, as well as waste management industries. And the last technical point, if we manage to mitigate these methane emissions, it has a considerable impact on the possibilities of reducing temperatures. Figures do not lie in that case. We are in 2025, whether you think of 2040 or by 2050, we could diminish the temperature increase by 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius, of course. We have talked about 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we manage to diminish this evolution perspective by 0.3 or 0.5, it changes everything. So the question now is, what can we do? A few things have been done already. France and other countries have participated in some measures.
sur le méthane,
with
qui rassemble beaucoup de pays.
the methane pledge that gathers many countries and has great results, but it's not enough. Another idea that was presented by the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, that we will listen to later. Now, this international protocol that she proposes is not easy to implement, and it can only function if the oil and gas industry also put some efforts. According to experts, the costs is not too much to bear, and it can even become a negative cost. It can be profitable even. This is a gold mine. So I am delighted that this is one of the themes that you chose to mention today, because we will be talking about what the Paris Agreement means, what Belém is a follow-up of the Paris Agreement, and more largely underpins the issue of multilateralism. There are solutions, and among these solutions, diminishing methane emissions. And I believe that in Belém, this question will be on the table. Thank you, Mr. Fabius. I believe that your advocacy was extremely concrete and based off of data that some of us know, but not everyone necessarily knows about. So now I would like to turn to Mr. Lago with a question. Will you have these issues on the COP30 agenda, and how will you reach them? And what type of negotiation methods will you use during COP30? Of course, I agree with everything that Laurent was saying. I believe that it is crucial, and thank you for France, Brazil, and others that we will talk about this, about methane during the summit. On the 6th of November, as well as during the rest of the COP, it is an extraordinary possibility to reduce green gas emissions so clearly. Waste management, for example, is the type of project that is very well received by our populations, and it has an extraordinary impact on life quality. Sometimes mitigation projects are not close to the people, and the people are more likely to see what we do with waste management as something positive. Now, I would like to say that I do like receiving well-thought advice by Laurent Fabius and the other members of the Circle of Presidents that we created. And I am also delighted to see we have created 4 circles. There is the Circle of Presidents, the Circle of Finance Ministers, the Circle of the Peoples, with indigenous people, Afro-descendant of Brazil, of America, and everywhere else. And finally, the circle of the ethical, of taking stock ethically. We have had extremely positive results. with the president of Chile, Ms. Bachelet, who was very active in this ethical circle. She said that the Minister of Brazil said that we need to listen to all the circles of society in order to incorporate into the negotiations all of the dimensions, and especially this dimension that has been a bit lost to technology and rising inequalities, as well as in order to integrate all the population. So I'm delighted to be here with you, Mrs. President. Thank you. And I know that you had a dialogue in the circle of presidents between COP presidents. And now I would like to ask you more broadly, 10 years after the Paris Agreement, you have seen the entirety of these discussions, and how do you see them evolving, changing? You have to dare say new things. Do you see the usefulness of one COP per year? How do you see new governance? How do you see new governance that we need to implement?
This
is a fundamental question. Paris was 10 years ago. Belém is in 10 days.
Alors, compte tenu de ce qu'on comprend de l'évolution
in light of how we see society evolve, everything is so swift, how something that we knew a few weeks ago becomes obsolete. Well, things go very fast, and when some criticize the defects of the Paris Agreement to the point where it's almost unfair. I said earlier the Paris Agreement was under attack. So, at those times, Madam Minister, André, myself and other circles should explain why the Paris Agreement is a success. We must repeat this ad nauseum. Facts that are not known by people. Some spread some information with ill intent, saying the Paris Agreement did no good, we still have a heating, and we overpassed the 1.5 threshold. This is far behind us. We need to forget about this. We need to turn to the future, look to the future. No. We need to look to science. It is very clear that although there is heating, we need to curb it. And every time you have 1/10 of a degree on top of 2.8 degrees of heating, dozens of millions of lives are in danger. And we should not stop at repeating this. It's also about investments and jobs. You mentioned the figures this morning, André. There has been a boom in new clean energies. And simultaneous with this, traditional fossil fuels still play a major role. And in Dubai, there was a decision to transition out of fossil fuels, but there was considerable progress. And many companies, maybe not all, but many companies understood that going towards fighting against climate change and preserving productivity was the same thing. And some countries understood that if they were to keep being independent and sovereign, they needed to change their energy mix. These are facts, but they need to be repeated again and again. And if they're not,
accentué ou utilisé
You see mistrust,
certains dont je parlais.
distrust being used by people of ill intent. And
La
do correct me if I'm wrong, André.
va s'inscrire dans
The
la
Belém
lignée
COP
de la COP de Paris,
will
en
be
tenant
built
compte
on
des éléments
the
nouveaux.
Paris Agreement,
Et
but it
c'est
will
pourquoi
also
je dis
include
souvent, quand on me demande de
new
résumer pourquoi
features,
Paris était un
new
succès,
information.
je dis,
And oftentimes when I'm asked why Paris
à cause des
is a
3
success,
S,
I say because of the 3 S's: science,
Society and States. À cette époque, nous avons réussi à opérer la conjonction
at that
entre la
time,
science, qui
we
n'était pas
joined
critiquée
together
autant qu'aujourd'hui,
science, which was not criticized as much as today, society, maybe not
beaucoup de la
all of
société
society, but a
qui
big
allait
chunk of
dans
it,
le sens de, et évidemment,
that went
déterminant le
towards the
States,
same
parce que
direction,
nous avons
and
mis
the
d'accord
States, obviously.
l'époque si
We
près
brought
et puis
together
Diplomatie est là aussi, pour y
many states around the table, as allowed the times. But science today
Society,
is
il y a
under
des
attack.
éléments, y compris suscités,
Society, well, there are some quarters that challenge current trends, and states also.
toujours en anglais,
So,
des 3 S
again,
au
in English,
3 I.
we need to move from 3 S's to the 3
Inclusion
I's:
and
implementation, inclusion, innovation.
Implementation. Ce qu'on nous demande, et si j'ai bien compris, ce que veut faire le
What we're
président Lula,
asked to do, and what
c'est pas
President Lula
d'inventer
and
des
yourself
nouveaux
want to do,
objectifs.
is not to
C'est, comme on dit en
invent,
anglais,
come
de
up with
délivrer.
new goals, is
Les
to
gens nous demandent,
deliver.
à chaque COP, on
People
dit, on va faire
ask
ci, on va
us,
faire ça,
okay, every
financièrement,
time we
etc.
come up
Eh
with
bien,
a
maintenant,
laundry list of what we want to do.
Voilà.
Well, it is now time to say, okay, we need to take
Alors ça,
action,
c'est un
implement.
changement, politique. On dit, bah,
Well,
mais
this
quels
is-
vont être les résultats
This
politiques?
entails
Vous donnez des
political
nouveaux
change. What
objectifs
will be the
politiques.
political
Pas du tout.
agenda? Well,
L'objectif,
we don't need to
c'est
come
de
up with
délivrer.
yet even more political goals. We need to deliver, to implement.
J'ai entendu,
I heard
l'autorité internationale dire,
a notary, an international notary earlier say,
je dirais,
drill, baby, drill, he said.
baby,
No,
implement.
I want to say implement, baby, implement. This is what
Alors,
this is
ça veut
about.
dire très concrètement que la TFFF
So, practically
va
speaking,
y arriver.
well,
Si, je l'espère. On en a besoin.
we need to make progress.
Là où est la COP. Ça veut dire que du point de vue financier,
TFFF will be a success.
Enfin,
On the financial side, we need to
ça,
look
c'est une innovation très importante.
to measures to make it a success. Innovation, you made a strong decision with President Lula as well.
C'était les États qui intervenaient. C'est les États qui-
Traditionally, states took action,
L'orientation, c'est
but
que
under the
on
current
va
guidelines,
mettre davantage dans le coup les autorités
I
locales.
understand that you want to include much more local actors,
Les
local
entreprises,
authorities,
business, parce que si
companies,
elles ne sont pas là,
businesses.
comment on peut faire?
Without them,
Et l'ensemble des
how are we to act? And
l'inclusion.
the whole range
L'inclusion
of
par
players,
rapport à d'autres,
inclusion.
préoccupations. Je sais, Madame la
Inclusion
ministre,
as
je
compared
sais
to
que
other
vos thèmes,
topics.
je
I
sais
know
que
that,
favoris.
Madam Minister,
On peut
you
pas,
care
comme à
deeply
Paris,
about
penser
inclusion.
uniquement au climat.
Unlike
Maintenant, le
Paris, you
climat
cannot
est
only think about
interdépendant,
climate.
on le sait,
Climate
d'autres
is
grandes COP,
intrinsically
les océans,
linked
la biodiversité,
with other
etc.
topics,
Donc, il
ocean,
va falloir
biodiversity. We
mettre
know
ça
this from
en
other
œuvre
COPs.
au
So
thème de
we need
l'inclusion.
to
Et
take
ça va se traduire
all of
notamment
this
par
into
une
account
modification de ce
through
qu'on appelle
inclusion,
dans le
and
jargon
this will
action
entail a
agenda,
modification
c'est-à-dire
of the
que,
action
au lieu d'avoir
agenda
500,
in the
600
jargon.
actions dont
Instead of
personne ne
having
sait
500
quel est le
to
bilan,
600
tu as,
action
proposé
items,
un dessin beaucoup
you
plus
suggested
précis
a
où il
much
va falloir
simpler
mettre en œuvre les moyens de
schematic
vérifier ce qui est fait
of
avec les objectifs,
ways
les
we
résultats
can
et puis des
measure
calendriers.
action
C'est pas la même
and
méthode, mais
measure
l'objectif est toujours le même.
measure progress
Et puis,
against a
innovation,
timeline.
parce que
And then,
tu as décidé
this
que
final
on va
point,
parler aussi
innovation,
du thème de la justice.
you decided
On va parler
that
aussi
justice
de la
would
Cour
be
internationale
broached.
de justice a pris une
The
décision
International
qui n'est pas nulle et qui dit
Court of
que
Justice
ce qui est
took a
à Paris,
decision
c'est pas simplement souhaitable,
saying
c'est une obligation légale.
you
Avec
have
la possibilité
a
de
legal
poursuivre l'État qui
obligation
ne ferait
to
pas le nécessaire.
act, and states
aussi,
can
et
be
c'est un
sued
thème qui est
for
discuté en
climate
ce moment,
inaction. And there's
discussion
another
sur,
topic
les fake news et
that's
comment on
debated
donne une
now,
information,
fake news.
correcte. Bref, les 3 I, c'est une
So,
nouvelle
to
manière
come back to the 3 I's, this is a new
d'être
approach,
fidèle à l'accord de Paris, mais
a new
de porter les
approach
choses
to
plus
being faithful to the Paris Agreement, but also to build upon it. This is why I gather from the statements by President Lula and President André. So we'll let President André speak on his own behalf. Beyond COP30, how do you see the future of this negotiation process? Well, as a diplomat, I can say that diplomats who negotiate at the WTO or elsewhere are very jealous of their own space. So climate change in the beginning seemed to be isolated, insulated from other topics. It seemed to be a very scientific subject. But very quickly, all other topics became linked to it: economy, health, public health, nature, biodiversity. So we now understand that we cannot solve the climate crisis only by gathering experts around a table, but the legitimacy of negotiation within the framework of the Convention and the Paris Agreement was, well, maybe objectionable. And the reason why we have these circles of presidents is to make sure that all those people who were at work for the Paris Agreement and other documents are together to make suggestions on how to move forward. A lot of progress was made these past 10 years, but structurally we negotiated everything we could within this framework. Obligations, how countries should submit contributions, and the carbon market under the Article 6 also. So the Paris Agreement is ready to be implemented. There's no reason to wait further. And yet, action is independent from negotiations because each country has a mandate and has freedom to take action. So I think there may be tendencies for some negotiations to say, negotiators to say that action should be controlled by negotiation itself. But negotiation has a strength, a real strength. It needs consensus. But this is why it's also difficult, complex. Negotiation should be the preserve of what is legal topics in the International Court of Justice. All other institutions and organizations must come out to support efforts against climate change. So the Circle of Finance Ministers does exactly that. We need them because the solutions we bring about against climate change are economic in nature, and governments must work hand in hand at a ministries level, including all ministries. We need international multilateral development banks also. Laurent, you may recall, in the beginning of the negotiations in Rio in '92, that was for the convention, you couldn't quote the World Bank because the World Bank at the time it's not under the umbrella of the UN. It was apart. So the first climate fund and a fund for biodiversity was brought under the World Bank, and there was great outrage and people saying we don't control this fund. But now there's been change. We have the Green Climate Fund. This is controlled by the Climate Convention. All these funds that were put together are outstanding. They do good work, but they follow the same pattern of thought in the beginning of the negotiation. We thought then that we could solve climate issues with specific funds, just like we did to great success with the ozone layer. The Montreal Protocol shows very clearly
multilatéralisme
that
fonctionne,
multilateralism does work,
on met des diplomates ensemble et ils résoudent le problème. C'est
and that you can really put together diplomats and solve issues. We curbed 95% of gases that were responsible for ozone destruction or depletion. So this was one example. There are 8 gases, in fact, that are included. But this cannot be a model that can be replicated for climate change because climate change, in fact, covers the whole of the economy. It's all activities, all businesses. So all countries must review their business model, their growth model. So we need the funds. We do have the funds, but the funds, well, they cover $40 billion per year at most, and we're mentioning $1.3 trillion in needs. So we need development banks, we need the private sector, we also need philanthropists, we need many, many more ideas. And Mr. Barbadian, the president of COP29, very dear friend sitting over there, and myself, Mr. Fabius and myself will present on the 3rd of November a report on how we can reach this hefty sum, $1.3 trillion per year by 2035. This was very easy, Mr. Babayev, to find $1.3 trillion. We'll present this document. It's such an immensity, it's such a vast sum. People keep thinking this is unreachable. But you did give the example of the pandemic. When we went through this crisis, in a few months, the world got together and found the resources, the money, and found solutions. And hopefully, we did have good results. Well, it remains for me to thank you. I think this last message is very optimistic, a message on multilateralism. I also believe that at any rate, well, as a human being, as human beings, we have to win this battle. If we don't, we're doomed.
Voilà, je crois que vous avez aussi beaucoup de pays qui doutent.
Many countries are doubting. They want to take action, but they may not know what to do. What are the ways and means? And I believe that collectively we should work with as many people as possible. As President Fabius said very eloquently earlier, we need to continue to hammer the same messages again and again and again so that they're heard all around society. Thank you very much, President Fabius. Thank you, President Corrêa de Lago. And let's meet again in Belém in 8 days. Thank you. Round of applause.
Nous allons maintenant passer à la clôture de cette journée.
We'll now move to the closing ceremony of this day. We're waiting for the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mottley. Please keep on your seats, stay on your seats. They'll be here with us shortly.
Madame Yavotler, very happy to meet you. Monsieur le Président de la République, Madame la Première Ministre,
President of the Republic of France, Madam Prime Minister, it is an immense honor for all of these participants to welcome you here at the end of this day, dedicated to the 10 years of the Paris Agreement. As you know, undoubtedly, our exchanges have been broken down into 3 roundtables on methane, the progressive transition away from coal, and also nature-based solutions. These are themes on which you have always emphasized during previous COPs, particularly as it relates to the link between nature and climate, something which you both hold dear. This day has also been the opportunity for participants of the forum to celebrate the 10 years of the Paris Agreement and its successes. The most important and the most evident success is that we have avoided the worst in terms of global warming, and that this agreement has enabled the emergence of real international solidarity. And I'm very pleased to give you the floor, Madam Prime Minister, so that you may tell us what you have taken away from these last 10 years since the Paris Agreement and how you see where we will be in the future. You have the floor, Madam Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam, and thank you for the opportunity, President Macron, my dear brother, Emmanuel, for being here to celebrate this 10th anniversary. This was a signal moment for small island developing states and for the vulnerable countries of the world. And for those who doubted it, you only need to see the number of crises that have happened in the course of the last 10 years. And it is perhaps very unfortunate that as I speak to you, we are still awaiting the outcome of the scale of damage that has been brought upon Jamaica in the last 24 hours, upon eastern Cuba, and upon Haiti, with stories of deaths apart from the devastating property damage coming out very clearly. And we do not know where it will end up in the next 2 to 3 days, with Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, Bermuda, all in the potential line of sight. I say this because we come year after year after year to say the same thing. And the truth is that the Paris Agreement has become the defining reference point for most people to say that this is when the world took seriously the ambitions. Doesn't mean that there haven't been some concerns along the way, because I've said for the last 6 or 7 years, we have confused commitment with capacity. And therefore, while we come to conferences and talk about commitments, we're not necessarily reflecting how we have the capacity to meet those commitments. I speak as a small island developing state that would have wanted, for example, to be much further ahead with our own targets, but constrained by access to batteries, constrained by the cost of batteries, constrained by then the cost of electricity to consumers. And I'm not sure that we have found the right way to be able to drill down to ensure that what we do on these stages can become actual reality in what we do there. At the same time, to ignore is to do so at our peril. And I fear that what we saw with Hurricane Melissa moving over a Caribbean Sea with warming temperatures of over 2 to 2.5 degrees more fueled that, such that people are now talking, should we create a new category of hurricane for a category 6? Because what we are facing is so much more virulent and awful than anything we've known before. I believe strongly, and you know, Emmanuel, that we need to pull the methane brake. We know, the scientists have told us, that the opportunity to be able to pull back the temperatures, not stop at 1.5, but actually reverse anywhere between 0.2 to 0.5 of a degree by 2050, comes predominantly from 1, controlling deforestation immediately, and 2, most importantly, cutting super pollutants like methane that are 80 to 100 times more dangerous than carbon, but only live in the atmosphere for 12 to 15 years. Now, if we can give ourselves a chance that a near zero methane world can exist by 2040, but let's talk the love language, because we have people who like the Paris Agreement and people who hate the Paris Agreement. And what is the common bridge of love and love language? Well, if I stop flaring gas, I stop burning cash. And if I fix pipes, I stop losing cash. So you meet the love language of those shareholders of the oil and gas companies. And as I said recently, they're not the enemy, it's the emissions that's the enemy. But two, you meet the objective of those of us who want to save the planet and also to create a chance for the people to live on the planet, hence the 4Ps position. There are other issues that cause methane, but equally the technology is there and the new practices are there. They won't have the same balance sheets as the oil and gas companies, but it is easier for us to be able to deal with human-made methane emissions than we are currently doing. If we can do that, here's what it actually does. It buys time for the same oil and gas sector to be able to seriously put money in R&D to scale up commercially the decarbonizing technology that is also needed for them to become a permanent part of the energy solutions, not at 20% by 2050, but perhaps at 30 or 35 or 40%. Why? Because the reality is, I do not believe that in the next 25 years, we will have enough capacity to allow everybody to do a just transition purely on renewable energy. Now, what does that mean for populations? It means that people will suffer. Because if you deprive them of access to affordable energy, what are you condemning them to in terms of development? And that is the genius of why people and planet must never be separated.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. As always, absolutely vibrant what you are saying, and I think that everyone agrees with what you're saying, and we're lucky to have next to you the President of the French Republic, who has also, over the last few years, been extremely involved so that France can continue through the One Planet Summit, but not only that, has contributed to maintaining the efforts of the international community on these themes so that they stay alive regardless of the crisis with which we're faced. And therefore, it's a great pleasure to give the floor to the President of the French Republic so that he may conclude this day. Thank you very much. First and foremost, thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister, dear Mia, for being here once again and having such a brilliant discourse. And indeed, I would also like to congratulate all of the work that was done 10 years ago here in Paris, and we're very lucky as well to have Laurent Fabius here with us, and André, who is involved in the preparation of the Belém COP that will take place in the next few weeks, or in a few days, I should say. And we will work together to uphold this agenda. The Paris COP and the Paris agreements allowed us to stop a very high-speed train. The path at the time was above 4 degrees, and so collectively we implemented a process, control mechanisms, and a discipline which enabled us to slow this train with the objectives 1.5 and carbon neutrality by 2050. We're not there yet internationally, but we have slowed things down significantly. I say this because it's very important to remain mobilized on this path. There was a before and an after. And we were able to demonstrate to the international community that we were able to resist withdrawals, backsteps. There was something irreversible that was created thanks to the Paris agreements and thanks to this collective mechanism. Now, I'd like to concentrate on 3 things, and this follows on precisely with what Mia Mottley has just said. The first is, what do we focus our efforts on? We know what the stages are. In Belém, we are going to uphold our 2035 deadline. And over the last few days, we have also said that we're going to ensure that we are on the path for carbon neutrality by 2050, and we're going to ensure that we activate the right technical levers so that we can get there. Now, what must we do? We need to move forward faster on innovation. We need to support companies so that the transition is fair, and we also need to ensure that we have greater technological neutrality, because science, each sector evolves differently, and I think that we can arrive at the same result if we have greater technological neutrality. And we also need the right level of public and private investments. I'll come back to this point later on because it's key. Now, internationally speaking, if we zoom out, I think we have two main combats. One on methane. This was just mentioned. This is key. It's key so that we can move quickly on a high-emitting gas. We know that this relates to a number of sectors, a number of countries, but we have technologies that enable us to get there, so we need to mobilize coalitions. And it's a coalition in which we can bring the United States with us, and this is compatible with the agendas of a number of countries that may express doubt. So methane is very effective, and there is a greater consensus to move quickly. The second is coal. There are still a number of large, rich emitting countries, and sometimes they're exporters. We have countries that are emerging, that haven't yet hit their peak, and some are speeding up. But what we can do to transition more quickly away from coal, and perhaps switching to gas, this is progress in some countries, and switching to nuclear energy is even better. But withdrawing from coal is indispensable. And in this respect, what we built over the last few years with the pact that we built during the Glasgow COP, this enabled us to support countries for decarbonisation and to transition away from coal, and this is vital. There is a process that we launched in Glasgow and then also in Egypt, which will support the transition. I mention this because there are many countries that continue to invest in coal plants. And if we want to reach these deadlines, we need to reinvest, if I may say, so that we can transition away from coal. And we have the support internationally. So methane and coal. Now, the third main fight, obviously, funding. And I would like to emphasize the importance of public financing. And there are others that are withdrawing their public financing, but we need to mobilize a lot more private financing. And what we've done over the last few years, in particular with the One Planet Summit, in terms of sovereign funds, so I had a meeting just a few days ago with asset managers, is to create a category of assets that are identified by private stakeholders that enable us to redirect private international liquidity to classes of assets that enable this transition. That is the agenda of the Paris Agreement, and that's why we need to move forward. So we need to resist, but those three elements, methane, coal, and financing. Now, I'll move on to my second set of remarks. Over the last few years, scientists have consolidated the work of the IPCC. We have a huge challenge in terms of biodiversity, and this is not non-negligible. This is just as important because our biodiversity is a solution to emissions, because we have primary forests, mangroves, and our oceans that are carbon sinks, but also because they're sources of natural innovation that enable us to reduce emissions, but also because they are levers for adaptation when it comes to climate change. It means that we can resist much better to climate change. And also I have a very strong thought for our colleagues in the Caribbean, and Mia is here with us, whereas our colleagues have been struck by this terrible phenomenon, and a thought goes to Jamaica and Cuba in particular. But biodiversity is a fight that we must move forward with. We are building a methodology with the biodiversity credits, and this work has been requested by Madame Fossette Angoula. So we're currently stabilizing this method, and the nexus, if I may say, between the climate and biodiversity is fundamental if we wish to succeed. And really, we need also reforestation policies, but also the conservation of primary forests and mangroves. In these primary forests, we have biosphere reserves and 3/4 of global biodiversity reserves. And I think that if we destroy them, then we're set back a few more steps. So in Gabon, for years, if we continue in this way, we're going to destroy the planet much quickly. And I would also like to hail the commitment of President Lula, who has committed to this topic. But I think, and we have a number of foundations that are present here today who have helped us on this point, we need to ensure that we promote these conservation credits and also support countries, but also indigenous peoples and local communities who are essential in this fight, so that we can pay for preservation. And that's what we're currently building, and that's what we'll continue to build internationally, a policy of reforestation and to preserve mangroves and primary forests. This is essential if we want to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Now, the last fight is exactly what Mottley has just said, using the example of methane and speaking about people and planet, which are not opposed. In 2023, there were 60 or so countries from across the globe, from the south, from the north, east, west. We created a shared platform, which is the Pact for People, Prosperity and the Planet. And the method, and this was initiated by the Bridgetown Initiative, launched by Mottley. Now, this is a call to countries who have been affected by climate change and who believe in the climate, but who we were asking, which countries were asking, okay, so fine, then you need to give up your development policies. This is an area of division, and it's also it can't be understood. So you have to fight against poverty, but you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't explore gas, and because it's not good for the planet. And they would say, well, that's nice of you to say. You have coal plants because you don't have your Russian gas, and you're asking us not to do certain things. So what we need is a global strategy. We need national strategies, we need public-private financing, we need a compatible country strategy and the reconsolidation of an agenda that brings together climate and biodiversity, the fight against inequalities, and the financing of shared policy, in particular as it relates to health. And many are trying to unsew this agenda, which seeks to be inclusive and which respects national strategies. The 4P, which is hosted by the OECD, plays an essential role to reconcile everyone around this agenda: prosperity, climate, biodiversity, and the financing of our shared commons, in particular health. And this will enable us to ensure that we meet the climate agreement and that we deliver results. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much. Thank you to all of those who are active on this agenda.
I want to thank you for that comprehensive statement, but if I may just add one or two things to give further context. On the financing issue, the reality is that it was 2 years ago here when we launched the 4Ps that the World Bank agreed to the natural disaster clauses, the climate resilience disaster clause, I think they renamed it. The bottom line is that had Barbados been hit now, we would for the next 2 years be able to unlock about 18% of GDP in terms of liquidity by deferring both principal and interest payments for our debt for 2 years. The World Bank did it. We went to the international capital markets in June for a bond issuance of 500 million US, and the markets gave us the natural disaster clauses, along, by the way, with a pandemic clause. What we need now to see is sovereign entities giving them in their bilateral loan agreements. That has not happened. There is no country, company, or entity that is going to unlock 18% of GDP to rebuild a country because of underinsurance and uninsurance and infrastructure damage over a 2-year period. And all this is a legal clause, nothing more, that gives greater certainty to the lender and creates space for the borrower. So this is a no-brainer. And the market is already doing it, and the World Bank is already doing it. The UK Export Agency is doing it. We need countries now across the world to do it. Secondly, we recognize that God helps those who help themselves. And I don't say so facetiously. We did not create the climate crisis. And we don't have the luxury of waiting for persons who created it to step up to the plate and to help us. So we've started in our own deliberate action. We turned a catastrophe fund into a resilience and regeneration fund. Every citizen of Barbados, everybody rather, who works in Barbados, donates 0.25% of their earnings without a cap. Every self-employed person, 0.25% of their earnings. Every employer matches what the employees are paying. And the government has committed to put in 0.35% of GDP every year, which is half of what should have been the ODA limits. Now, we do that not because we have room or because we have no further development imperatives, but like Jamaica and other countries in the region, or Barbados last year when our fishing industry was decimated by 90% and we lost our fishing harbor, our Coast Guard base was damaged and our coast was damaged, we have to find ways of refinancing in the interim. And I share these two examples because it is imperative that we continue the effort of unlocking further funds within the MDBs, but secondly, that we also go beyond the $780 million in the loss and damage fund that will be wasted in 1 or 2 disasters if appropriately utilized. So we've made that loss and damage fund almost dead on arrival by failing to capitalize it appropriately. I believe that we cannot ignore the need for further public and private sector funds, and this is not ignoring the fact that in the G7 countries there are real fiscal difficulties. We accept that. But we have to find a way of redesigning how the financial system works. And quite frankly, water, education, and health loans should get at least 30-year loans for middle-income and upper-middle-income countries and 40-year loans for HIPC or low-income countries. If we can do that, while not meeting us where we want to be met with respect to the funding that we need for adaptation, it at least moves the needle forward. And that is what we're asking the G7 and the G20 countries to be able to use their political leverage in the IFIs in order to be able to get that paradigm shift in the loans, starting with water, education, and health. And health, as we know, has been seriously affected also by the climate crisis. Thank you. I just want also for us to say to the people of Jamaica and Cuba and Haiti and the rest who are about to face Hurricane Melissa that our prayers are with them, and that I'm sure that all of us here agree that we will step up to the plate to be able to help in the humanitarian and relief efforts that are required in the incoming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame. Thank you, Madame Mottley. I think we could spend the night debating about what are the needs for development, how we build development, and what is the link with all the climate crisis that we are facing. And of course it is obvious, but then there are all kinds of different ways to look at it. This is certainly a discussion that you will have again with President Macron, who is, okay, next week I have heard, okay, great. So, while you will meet with him next week, I just wanted again to say that we need you, Mr. President, into those debates, because we hear too much voices which actually say, let's give up on this discussion. And this is not the sense of what you are saying. You are saying that actually, yes, there are things that we need to fix, but we need to advance all together. And I really want to thank you in the name of everyone for this message to from both of you. Thank you so much.